Hello and welcome to my Flosstube extra video, which today is about how to measure your piece of stitching for a custom frame ordering online. Now, this tutorial was a request from one of my viewers after seeing that I had ordered some custom frames from a framing website. And I had a good experience with this company. It is pictureframesexpress.co.uk. So what I talk about today will be my experience with them. I'm in no way affiliated with them. I'm not trying to direct you to them particularly, but I did have a good experience with them, and I am just going to explain how I went about that measurement process for ordering from their site. So it may be that if you choose to order from a different site, there will be some slight differences or variations in what you might need to do, but I think the principles would hold reasonably true for everyone. So these are a couple of the frames that I had shown previously. Oh, ring light glare. And I did have a very good experience. I'm very happy with the frames that came sized, the quality, the workmanship. It was lovely. They came beautifully packaged. It was expensive to have the postage and packaging, but the framing itself wasn't too expensive. So I guess this tutorial is in a sense for the more budget conscious amongst us. So it isn't always possible to take your piece to a framer and have it professionally framed, because it is, cost prohibitive in many respects. If it's not, then great, go for it and have a professional who knows what they're doing get on with it. But I decided to have a go myself for some of these, and I was happy enough with my job, but I was very happy with the frames that came when I ordered. This is another one that I had ordered from them. Sorry, just trying to avoid all sorts of glare this morning. Yeah, I did have a good experience, and the viewers wanted to know how I had gone about measuring my piece of work. So I want to tilt the camera down and do the best I can. I'm sorry that maybe my setup isn't super. I will do my best to show you how I measured, what measurements to take, and also a few tips and things to look out for when you are ordering on an online site. I should just say also at this point that if you are interested in pictureframesexpress.co.uk, they do not, as standard, send glass in their frames. They do provide plexiglass. So when you look through their site, they explain that posting glass is a tricky thing. And if the glass were to break, it will perhaps ruin your picture or your stitching. It will perhaps ruin the frame as well, glass shards floating about inside a parcel. That is all a possibility. And so I think probably from insurance purposes and damage, they have decided that they do not send glass in their picture frames. You can ask them to, you can request it by email, but basically then you absolve them of any liability for damage. But what I do want to tell you is that in both cases of these frames, I have the plexiglass, and it is a very good quality plexiglass. Now on their site, it tells you the brand, and it's, I don't know anything about these things really, but it tells you that it's a good brand and that the plexiglass actually offers 7 times more UV protection than standard glass would. And obviously that would be different for conservation glass or museum glass, which another framer might be able to provide. But just in case you had any concerns, I did want to tell you that the plexiglass is really good quality. It is superior to what you might find in your IKEA frame. Yeah, much superior to that. Not that there's anything wrong with the IKEA frame, and I use them myself, but just, as a baseline to compare, this is a much better, higher quality plexiglass, and is very nice. You do have the option to remove it entirely and have no glass, no plexiglass either in your frame, but as I said, just to let you know that glass doesn't come as standard. It is plexiglass that they use, and you'd have to make a special request if you want glass on your piece. Okay, let me reconfigure the camera setup here, and then I will hopefully show you briefly what measurements to record, what measurements to add and consider when you are wanting to place a custom frame order. Your framer's site should have information on it about their recommendations for measuring your piece of work, your picture that you want framed, okay? It is advisable to go and read what they have to say. On pictureframesexpress.co.uk, on their homepage, down at the bottom they have a series of links. One is called Information Centre, and in there you will find measurement guides. They are very helpful. You may find it on other sites in the FAQ section or something, but there should be on a framer site advice as to how you measure your piece before sending your order in. Please do read that in case there is something different to what I'm telling you here, but it probably is going to be similar in the majority of cases. So the considerations that you have, the measurements that you need to take, are the width and the height of your stitching, but you also need to make allowances for how much fabric do you want to show between the finish of your stitching and the start of your frame, and that may vary considerably depending on the piece, depending on the fabric that you're working on, and on your personal preferences. Okay. And you also want to be sure to include an allowance if any of your picture, the sized piece that you put into the website, is going to disappear behind the rebate of the frame. So the rebate of the frame is just the bit of in here that lies behind the frame, so it sits in nicely. So in most cases I have found it to be about 1/4 of an inch, but you would need to look at the site and the frame that you are choosing to find the rebate size. In most cases the ones that I ordered were 6 millimeters, which is 1/4 of an inch, but do check that. So those are the 3 measurements really that you need. Well, there's 4, sorry, there's width and there's height, and then there's the extra fabric that you want to show, and then there's the little allowance for the rebate. When you're taking measurements, use a reliable measurement. Don't use a Christmas cracker tape measure, just in case it's not reliable. I am a quilter, so I have a series of quilting rulers which are very helpful, I have to say, for this purpose, mainly because they're see-through and you can place them on your work and you can get an idea of, oh yes, I'd like this much extra fabric showing, or I'd like this much extra fabric showing. It's just a nice, easy way to be able to see, but it's not necessary at all. If you do have them in your home, do use them. But if you don't, you can use a standard ruler if your piece is small enough. I don't recommend it for measuring a piece that's going to end up more than the 12 inches or 30 centimeters of the ruler, mainly because if you have to measure a bit and then add on, I think it increases the possibility of error. So it wouldn't be my recommendation. I'm sure you can do it, but just be careful if you are. But if your piece is small enough like this one, you would be able to measure this with a standard ruler. And of course you can use a tape measure as well. Most of the sites that I looked at when I was considering ordering custom frame sizes allow you to change between imperial and metric measurements, so you can decide whether you want to order in inches or in millimeters and centimeters. Being a quilter, I take all my measurements in inches. It's just what I'm used to, that feels natural and normal to me. And so I just click the little button on the site that allows me to change my measurements and input them in inches. So just make sure that you have got the right unit when you input the measurements that you measure. So for purposes of this little demonstration, I will be measuring in inches, and I'm going to use my quilting ruler. So the first measurement I need is a stitch width, which in this instance is 4 inches. Okay, and I record that. Stitch width 4 inches. Okay, just check somewhere else along the width that it still is 4 inches, that actually don't have, for some reason, a little bit of variance. I think it's particularly true when you don't have a border to guide your measuring. So for example, if we were to measure this one, there is no border, so you want to be sure that you are getting the very last stitch this way and the very last stitch that way, which is not the edge of the hive, is in fact the edge of the base of the hive. So just take a couple of width measurements to check yourself that you are correct. Once you have done that, you will want what I have termed the fabric allowance measurement, and in this instance I think that 1/2 inch would be a nice width between the end of my stitching and the beginning of the frame. So I'm going to add on 1/2 inch to my stitch width, but I need that 1/2 inch on both sides, so it's 1/2 inch times 2, giving me 1 inch for my fabric allowance. So there you go, 1 inch for my fabric allowance. Okay, and then I need to know the rebate allowance. So I know that the frame I've looked at is 6mm rebate width. That is 1/4 inch. Again, I need that 1/4 inch on both sides. Don't forget to add it on both sides. So 1/4 inch times 2 is another 1/2 inch. So I have got the rebate allowance, 1/4 inch times 2 is 1/2 inch, and that gives me the 4 inches, plus 1 is 5, plus 1/2 is 5.5 inches total width. Okay. Then you're going to do exactly the same thing, but this time for the height of your piece of stitching. So you'll measure the height. Now, this piece is 7 5.5 tall, so it's somewhere between 7 5/8 and 7 3/4. So I am going to record it as 7 3/4 because it's not possible to put that fraction into the website. So 7 3/4 is what I'm going to work with as my height. So here we go, stitched height 7 3/4 inches. I'm going to have the same fabric allowance. I'm going to have 1/2 inch top and 1/2 inch bottom. So 1/2 inch times 2 is 1 inch for fabric allowance. And the rebate is the same again as this rebate up here. It was 1/4 inch on both sides is times 2 equals 1/2. So now we have 7 3/4 plus 1 is 8 3/4 plus 1/2 is 9 1/4 inches. So my total height for this piece is 9 1/4 inches. So I now have a total width measurement of 5.5, a total height of 9 3/4, and those are the figures that I can input onto the website to order my custom frame. That is really it. There is no other magic to it. I do recommend that before you measure your piece, you make sure that it is well pressed. You want to be sure that you're not going to find another 1/8 inch because it wasn't pressed and it was wrinkled up, or it's going to be harder for you to measure if it's not well pressed. But that, as I say, is it. You have the measurements that you need, your width or your height. You then add on your fabric allowance, and then you add on the rebate allowance. And that should give you the measurements that you need to make your custom frame order. In terms of how much your fabric allowance should be, that is an entirely personal preference. If you have a beautiful piece of hand-dyed model fabric, for example, I had a project earlier this year on a piece of hand-dyed fabric that was gifted to me by one of my viewers, and that fabric was called Funfair. It was gorgeous, summery colours, all blended together, yellows and peaches and pinks and lovely warm colours. And I stitched a Fracture Love sampler on that piece. But when it was being framed, I wanted to be sure that the fabric, got a good view. So I didn't want my frame right up close to the edge of the stitching. I wanted to leave about an inch of fabric showing all around my piece, because the fabric was also a statement in that piece. So you will have your own reasons as to why you want a certain width, and that's entirely up to you. So I hope that this little demonstration will give some of you the confidence to take the measurements that you need and go ahead and order some frames online from someone who is a reputable supplier. I know that Michelle at Mama Loves You GB uses a number of different sites in the UK to order frames from. So if you hear floss tubers mentioning it and that they are happy, then that's a reasonable recommendation for ordering from those sites. So that's what I would do. I can't make guarantees for you, but I hope that you would have a good experience, and I hope it means that you will be able to get a few of your pieces framed up and on the wall. So thank you very much. I hope it's been helpful, and I'll see you again another time. Bye.